Eleanor Whitlock stood up in the middle of Lady Caldwell's parlor, picked up her teacup, and set it down so carefully it didn't make a single sound. Then she looked at the man she had loved for 3 years. Nathaniel Beaumont stood by the fireplace. He did not move. He did not speak. His mother had just told Eleanor she was not his level. And he let her. Eleanor smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, picked up her gloves, walked to the door. She did not cry. She did not beg, she simply left. And the moment the door closed behind her, Eleanor Whitlock decided she was going to make every single one of them regret the day they ever looked past her. If you have ever been told you are not enough by someone who never truly saw you, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, follow Eleanor all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The afternoon Eleanor Whitlock rode to the Beaumont estate. She had dressed carefully, not out of vanity, out of respect for herself. Her best dress deep blue wool, ivory buttons her grandmother had stitched by hand. Her brown hair braided back, clean and smooth. Her boots polished until the leather caught light. She had looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin that morning and said the words out loud. The way her mother had taught her. You belong anywhere you choose to walk into. She believed it. She would not believe it again for a very long time. She had been to the Beaumont estate 4 times before. Each time the place pressed down on her, not violently, but steadily, the way old money presses, the white fences, the oak trees older than anyone alive, the portraits in the hallways of men who all looked slightly alike and slightly certain that the world had been arranged correctly. She had never let it show. Today she tied her horse at the post, walked up the gravel path and knocked. A housekeeper showed her into the parlor. Lady Margaret Caldwell was already seated. Nathaniel was already standing by the fireplace. He did not move when Eleanor entered. That was the first sign. She had been with Nathaniel Beaumont for 3 years. She knew his silences. She knew the difference between a man thinking and a man who had already thought and arrived somewhere he did not want to say aloud. This was the second kind of silence. Something is wrong. She ignored the voice. She smiled at Lady Caldwell. Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you for having me. Lady Caldwell gestured at the chair across from her. Sit down, Eleanor. Not Miss Whitlock. Just her first name. Delivered the way you say the name of something you have already decided to set aside. Eleanor sat. The housekeeper brought tea, 3 cups. No one touched them. Lady Caldwell let the silence stretch. Then she folded her hands in her lap and said, with the particular calm of someone who has rehearsed this conversation more than once, I want to speak plainly with you, my dear. I find plain speech is always kinder in the end. I appreciate plain speech, Eleanor said. Good, a single nod. Then I will tell you directly. My son has responsibilities to this family that go beyond personal feeling. The Beaumont name carries weight. The woman who becomes part of this family must be capable of carrying that weight alongside him. I understand that, Eleanor said. I'm not certain you do. Lady Caldwell tilted her head. You are a lovely girl, genuine in your affections. I believe. But genuine affection is not a foundation for a family like ours. My son needs someone his level, someone with standing, with resources, with a name that opens doors, not one that asks to be let in through them. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of a pause, the quiet of something breaking. Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. He was looking past her left shoulder, at the middle distance, not at his mother. Not at Eleanor, at the space of a man who has decided not to see what is happening directly in front of him. Nathaniel, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Nathaniel, are you going to say anything? 2 seconds. Long enough that Eleanor counted them. Then he said, My mother speaks for the family. 3 years. 3 years of Sunday afternoons at the bend of the creek where the cottonwood trees turned the light golden. 3 years of him telling her she was the most capable woman he had ever known. 3 years of plans, not dreams, plans specific and real, with details and timelines, and the particular seriousness of two people who mean what they say. My mother speaks for the family. Lady Caldwell pressed forward, her voice softening in the way that people's voices soften when they believe they are being merciful. You will find someone suitable, Eleanor. Someone who matches your circumstances. A decent man, a comfortable life. You are young still, Lady Caldwell. Eleanor's voice cut across the room. Not loud, just final. Lady Caldwell stopped. Let me ask you something, Eleanor said. She set her hands flat on her knees. Very still. In 3 years, has your son ever given you reason to doubt his judgment? Lady Caldwell blinked. I beg your pardon. His judgment, his decisions in business, his management of the estate, his character as a man. Eleanor's eyes held steady. Has he ever shown poor judgment? Made a choice you later regretted? A pause. Nathaniel has always been, then why? Eleanor said quietly. Does his judgment fail only when it comes to me? The room was absolutely silent. Even Nathaniel moved. Not much. His jaw tightened. Lady Caldwell's expression shifted not to anger, but to something more complicated. A woman encountering a question she had not prepared for. This is not a matter of judgment, she said finally. It is a matter of responsibility. Yes, Eleanor agreed. It is. She stood. She unclenched her hands. She had not realized until that moment that she had clenched them, and she smoothed the front of her dress carefully. From the waist down, both hands moving slow and deliberate. She looked at Lady Caldwell. You are right, she said. I should find someone my level. Lady Caldwell nodded. Relieved, perhaps, that this was ending cleanly. I am glad you understand. I don't think you do. Ma'am. Eleanor picked up her gloves from the arm of the chair. One finger at a time. When I say I will find my level, I don't mean I'll settle for less. I mean I'll rise until there is no question of what my level is. She paused. I hope you and your son live long enough to see it clearly. She turned to Nathaniel. For one moment, one single moment, she looked at him fully. He looked back. His expression was unreadable. His jaw was set. His hands were still at his sides. She waited. 1 second. 2, he said nothing. Goodbye, Mr. Beaumont, she said. She walked to the door, down the hall, out through the front entrance and down the gravel path without breaking stride once. She untied her horse, mounted in a single smooth movement, and rode. She made it past the bend where the oak trees closed the view behind her. Then she stopped the horse in the middle of the road. She pressed one fist against her mouth. She breathed. In, out, slow and controlled, the way you breathe when something inside you is trying to come apart and you do not have the time for it. 30 seconds. She lowered her hand. She straightened her back. And she rode home. The kitchen table was covered in papers when she arrived. Her father came out to meet her in the yard, one look at his face telling her before he said a word that something had gone wrong here too while she had been gone. Come inside, he said. She came inside. Bills of sale. Bank correspondence. Letters from Prescott Harlow, a name Eleanor had been hearing for 2 years. Attached always to the same information, wealthy, connected, patient, and interested in Whitlock land at a price that was an insult dressed up as an offer. He came by this afternoon, her father said. He sat heavy at the table, hands flat against the papers, made an offer. How much? He told her. Eleanor looked at the number. That's 40% below market value, she said. He knows that too. I know that too. Ellie. He rubbed his face. He was 61 and looked 10 years older tonight. But the banknote comes due in 8 weeks. If I don't have the payment, how much is the payment? He told her that number too. Eleanor pulled the nearest chair out, sat and pulled the stack of papers toward her. She began sorting, not anxiously, not desperately, but with the focused efficiency of someone who has been managing accounts since she was 16, because someone had to, and she was the one willing to do it. Ellie, her father said after a few minutes. Give me an hour, she said. Harlow's not going to Papa. She looked up. Give me an hour. He gave her the hour. In that hour, she built a picture. Not a pretty picture, a true one. The estate was not ruined. That was the first thing she established, going through the numbers with the particular focus that comes when there is no option but focus. The land was struggling seriously, in ways that would require work and time and decisions her father had been too tired to make, but it was not gone. The land itself was worth considerably more than Prescott Harlow's offer. The problem was not the land. The problem was the management of it. 3 fields planted with the same crop 5 years running, yields dropping every season as a result. Equipment contracts renewed without renegotiation, costing double what they should. 2 tenant farmers on the south section paying below rate for years because her father disliked confrontation. Water mismanagement on the north fields, causing flooding that was destroying a quarter of every wet season's crop. None of these things were disasters. Every single one of them was fixable. Eleanor pushed back from the table, went to the window, and stood looking out at the dark land. "All right," she said. Her father looked up. "All right?" She turned around. "Here's what we're going to do." He looked at her for a long moment at the set of her jaw, at the paper sorted into clean, precise piles across the table, at the steadiness in her eyes that had not been there 3 years ago. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She started before sunrise the next morning. The sky was still the blue-gray of early darkness when she was already out in the south field with a lantern, walking the rows, reading the soil the way her grandfather had taught her, not just the surface, but what was under it, what the color said, what the texture between her fingers said, what it needed and what it had too much of. She had borrowed 4 agricultural journals from the county library. She had read them by candlelight, 3 nights running, until the words blurred. She had started a record. Not the kind her father kept, a strategy document. Columns: the problem, the proposed solution, the required resources, the expected outcome at 6 months, 1 year, 3 years. She had been called, at various points, overly organized, intimidatingly precise, and from a man at a county meeting who laughed when he said it, almost like a man about the numbers. She had not been bothered by any of it. What she noticed, working the land those first days, was that the farmhands watched her. Not with hostility, with the careful attention you give to something you have not yet figured out how to categorize. A man named Jedediah Carter Jed, everyone said, had worked the Whitlock land for 11 years. Somewhere around 50, forearms like rope, the unhurried manner of a man who has outlasted many plans made by many people who underestimated how long things take. He was the first to say something, not to Eleanor. To Tommy, the youngest hand, 17 years old and unable to figure out what to call her. Eleanor heard it from around the corner of the equipment shed. Jed said, "Stop watching her like you're waiting for her to fall over. She ain't going to. Just do what she asks and watch what happens." Eleanor kept walking. She did not say anything about it, but she filed it away. And she was grateful. The first person to laugh at her openly was Harold Briggs. General Supply Store, her father's supplier for a decade on terms that were, Eleanor now understood, significantly more favorable to Harold Briggs than to anyone named Whitlock. She sat across from him in his back office, tobacco smell, old receipts, a window that hadn't been cleaned since summer, and told him she was renegotiating the supply contract. He looked at her over his spectacles. "Renegotiating," he said. "Yes, sir." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the current terms were set 8 years ago, and the market has changed. And on the grounds that the Whitlock estate represents a consistent volume of business that any supplier in the county would be glad to have." He leaned back, folded his hands, produced the smile. She recognized it, had seen it aimed at her father many times, the smile of a man who believes the person across from him doesn't quite understand how things work. "Miss Whitlock," he said, "these are business matters." "Has your father asked you to?" "My father has authorized me to manage the estate's external contracts." She placed a single page on the desk in front of him. These are the revised terms I'm proposing. I've included market comparison figures from 3 other suppliers in the region so you can see the basis for the numbers. He looked at the page. Looked at it longer than she expected. Because the numbers were right. She had been very deliberate about that. I'll need time to review this, he said. His voice had lost some of its expansiveness. Of course, Eleanor said. I'll expect your response by end of week. She stood, picked up her gloves and walked out. On the boardwalk outside, she let out one quiet, controlled breath. Then she moved to the next name on her list. She expected resistance. She got more than she expected. And worse. The county was a small, contained world with established channels and an established understanding of which kinds of people conducted which kinds of business, and in front of whom the serious conversations happened. Not women. Not women with farm dirt on their boots who showed up at bank appointments and contract negotiations with documented figures and the manner of someone who intends to be taken seriously. The reactions ranged from politely incredulous to something closer to contempt. At the bank, a clerk kept her waiting 40 minutes past her appointment, and then suggested she might be more comfortable with a male colleague who could explain the technical elements to her. Eleanor thanked him for his concern, explained that she had reviewed all documents thoroughly and was prepared to discuss any element in detail, and waited. At a meeting of local landowners she arrived at without invitation, because there had been no invitation, 3 men stopped talking when she walked in. One said, "This meeting is for property holders." "My father is a property holder," Eleanor said. "He has authorized me to represent the Whitlock estate." "That is not how it's done." "It is how it will be done today," Eleanor said. She sat down. The room stayed quiet. No one asked her to leave. She did not know if it was because they respected the move or simply had no framework for a woman who sat down like she had every right to the chair. She didn't care which. She was in the room. That was enough. 6 weeks in, past midnight. The kitchen table, a command post now, maps, records. Her dense handwritten notes covering every inch of the surface. The lamp burning low. Her father appeared in the doorway in his nightclothes. He looked at her. She looked back. "You should sleep," he said. "I will." He came to the table, stood over it, looking at the papers. His expression had the quality of a man trying to hold 2 things at once, something that looked like pride, and something that looked like grief. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Papa, let me say it." He sat down. "I should have done this. All of it. Years ago when things started going wrong. I should have been the one at this table. Instead, I let it go because it was easier. Because I didn't want the hard conversations." He paused. "And I let you carry what I was too tired to carry." "It's all right," Eleanor said. "It is not all right," he said quietly. "You are 26 years old and you are fighting battles that should have been mine." She looked at her father for a long moment. At the tiredness in his face. At the genuine remorse there. "I'm not doing it alone," she said. "You're here." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. They sat like that. Neither said anything about Nathaniel. That name had not been spoken in this house since the afternoon she came home from the Beaumont estate. But it was there between them, the way things that are not said are always there. Occupying space, displacing air. "The land is not lost," Eleanor said finally. "I want you to believe that." "I believe you," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Some of what I'm planning is going to make people uncomfortable." Her father's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something wearier and more real. "Has that ever stopped you?" he said. Eleanor looked at him for one moment. Then she laughed. It surprised them both. It surprised her most. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Addressed to the manager of the Whitlock estate. Not to her father. Not to Mr. Anyone. To whoever was actually running things. Somebody had done their research. It came from an estate management office 3 counties away. Requesting to know whether the Whitlock estate would receive a representative of a neighboring landholding. A potential arrangement regarding water rights along the shared creek basin. Eleanor read it twice. She wrote back the same day. She would be available Thursday. She did not ask who the representative was. She did not need to know yet. What she needed to know was that someone with enough resources to employ a professional estate management office had looked at the Whitlock land and seen something worth a conversation. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Wednesday evening. Behind the barn. She was fixing a split rail in the fence, hammer in hand. Dirt on her dress, hair escaping its braid when Jed Carter came around the corner. "You've got company, miss," he said. Eleanor straightened. "Who?" "Don't know him. Came up the road on a big gray horse." "Asking for whoever runs the Whitlock estate." "He's a day early," Eleanor said. "Yes, miss." She looked down at herself, the hammer. The state of her dress. She handed Jed the hammer. "Tell him I'll be there directly," she said. She did not go inside to change. If a man came to conduct business, he could take her as she was or not at all. She walked around the side of the barn. The man in the yard was not what she had pictured. Not a lawyer. Not a soft-middled land agent with ink-stained fingers and a document case. This man was tall in a way that didn't apologize for itself. His coat was dark blue, expensive, but the dust on his boots was real, which meant he had actually ridden a distance, rather than taking a carriage to look as though he hadn't. Somewhere in his mid-30s, dark hair, the kind of face that seemed to have been arranged specifically to give nothing away. He had his hat in his hands. When she came around the corner, he turned, his eyes gray, steady, direct, moved over her quickly. Not the way some men's eyes moved over women, more like a man looking at a problem he is trying to understand before it gets away from him. "I'm looking for the person managing this estate," he said. Low voice, no particular warmth, no condescension either. "You found her," Eleanor said. Something recalibrated in his expression. "Miss Whitlock," he said. She did not offer her hand. "You're a day early." "I am. I apologize. I found myself in the area ahead of schedule." Eleanor looked at him. "Your name," she said. "Nathaniel Beaumont." The yard went still. Or perhaps that was only Eleanor, the specific stillness that happens inside a person when the world presents them with something they were not prepared for, and they choose, in the space of one breath, not to let it show. She was aware of her own heartbeat doing something involuntary and complicated. She was aware of Jed Carter, 30 feet to her left, very carefully examining a fence post. She was aware that this man, this specific man, in his expensive coat with the real dust of 3 counties on his boots, was Nathaniel Beaumont. She kept her face exactly where it was. "Mr. Beaumont," she said. Her voice did not change. It was level and professional and entirely without warmth. "What exactly brings you to the Whitlock estate?" He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I've been reviewing regional land reports," he said. "A summary of your estate situation came across my desk 3 weeks ago." And with it a brief pause, a strategic document. "A proposal for rehabilitating the estate. I'd like to discuss it with you." "I wrote that document," Eleanor said. "I know. A beat. That proposal was sent as part of a confidential inquiry," she said. "Who forwarded it to you?" "My land agent monitors regional opportunities." He held the papers out. "Miss Whitlock, I want to be plain. I've reviewed proposals from a great many landholders. This one is different. The analysis of the Creek Basin issue in the Northfields describes a problem my own estate managers missed in an identical situation. I rode 3 counties to discuss it." Eleanor looked at the papers. At him, back at the papers. "You rode 3 counties," she said. "Yes, for a land report. For the person who wrote it," he said. His voice did not change, but something behind his eyes did. Just slightly. The way a door opens a fraction before someone decides whether or not to open it further. Eleanor was quiet for one moment. She thought, this man has money, title, and connections that could save this estate. She thought this man stood by a fireplace 6 weeks ago and did not say one word. She thought both of those things are true at the same time. And I don't have to decide what that means right now. "If you're here to discuss business, Mr. Beaumont," she said. I'm willing to hear you. But I want one thing understood first. What's that? I don't need this estate rescued, she said. I don't need charity, connections, or anyone's name on my work to make it succeed. What I need is a fair arrangement with a party who sees genuine value in a genuine partnership. If that's what you're offering, we can talk. He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look without difficulty. She had always been able to hold it. That's what I'm offering, he said. Then come inside, she said. I'll get the records. She turned and walked toward the house. She did not look back. They worked through the records for 4 hours. The sun moved across the kitchen floor, turned orange. Turned red, disappeared. Her father appeared once in the doorway, saw who was sitting at his table, and withdrew without a word. Nathaniel asked precise questions, listened to answers completely. Read everything she handed him with the attention of someone who actually intends to understand, rather than simply appear to. At the end of it, he set down the last page and sat back. The fence line along the western boundary, he said. You've proposed moving it 8 feet north. The original 1849 survey places it incorrectly, Eleanor said. The land on the other side of the current line is ours. Can you prove that? I have the original survey documents. Harlow will contest it. He can contest all he likes. The documents are the documents. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. That will start a conflict, he said. Yes, Eleanor said. I know. You're not afraid of that. Not a question. An observation. Eleanor squared the papers she'd been working from and set them to one side. Mr. Beaumont, she said, I have an estate on the edge of foreclosure. A neighbor who has been deliberately mismanaging shared water resources to drive down my land value so he can buy it at a fraction of what it's worth. And half this county who believes a woman managing property is either a curiosity or a mistake. She paused. I don't have the time or energy to be afraid of a boundary dispute. Something moved in his expression. Something she didn't have a name for yet. He stood. Took his hat. I'll have my office send the formal proposal, he said. You'll want to review the terms. I will. He moved toward the door. He stopped. Miss Whitlock, Mr. Beaumont. He stood with his back to her for a moment. Hat in hand. Something in the set of his shoulders that was not quite the controlled stillness he'd arrived with. There's a line in your document, he said, in the creek basin section. You describe subsurface water table behavior using terminology I've only seen in university agricultural papers. Where did you? I read everything available, Eleanor said. If you want to understand a problem, you read everything available about it. He was quiet for a beat. Yes, he said. You do. Then one more pause. Smaller, the kind that might mean nothing, or might mean a great deal, he said. You haven't asked me why I came a day early, Miss Whitlock. Eleanor stacked the last of her papers. Did not look up. I assumed your land agent's schedule changed, she said evenly. It didn't, he said. He put on his hat and walked out. Eleanor listened to the hoofbeats on the gravel. Getting quieter, getting smaller. She sat alone. Lamp burning low, papers across the table, the land outside dark and quiet. She pulled the nearest page toward her. She stared at it for a long moment without reading it. Then something happened in her chest, not grief exactly. Not anger. Something older and quieter, the specific ache of a woman who has spent 6 weeks being iron and steady and has just been reminded. By the sound of a voice she once knew very differently. That iron is still a thing that can be cold. She pressed her hand flat against the table. 1 breath. 2. Then she picked up her pencil. She went back to work. She had always been able to do that. Right now, it was the only thing in her life that felt entirely unbroken. But somewhere in the back of her mind, quiet, not yet named, was the memory of a man who had just told her, without saying it directly, that he had not come to the Whitlock estate one day early because of a schedule. She did not think about what that meant. Not tonight. Tonight there was work to do, and her land was waiting. The formal proposal from Beaumont's office arrived Friday morning. Eleanor had it open before the messenger's horse had cleared the front gate. She read it once quickly. Then she read it again slowly, with a pencil in her hand, marking 3 places in the margin. The terms were fair. More than fair if she was being honest with herself. Water rights along the shared creek basin, a structured agreement for coordinated land management. And the part that made her stop and read a third time a clause that gave the Whitlock estate first right of refusal on any future sale of the adjacent northern parcel that bordered their property. That northern parcel was exactly what Prescott Harlow needed to complete his land acquisition strategy. Nathaniel Beaumont knew that. He had put a wall between Harlow and that parcel and offered Eleanor the key. She sat with the document for a long time. Then she picked up her pencil and wrote 7 questions in the margin, not objections. Questions. Specific, technical, the kind that tell the person reading them that the person who wrote them has read the document carefully and intends to understand every word before she signs anything. She sent it back the same afternoon with a note that said she would require a meeting to discuss the terms before proceeding. She did not say when she was available. She let him respond first. His reply came the next morning. He could meet Wednesday. His estate or hers, whichever she preferred. She wrote back. Hers. She wanted him on her ground. She wanted him to see what she had built in 6 weeks before they sat across from each other and talked about what came next. The days between Friday and Wednesday were not quiet. Prescott Harlow came to call on Monday. Eleanor was in the north field when one of the younger hands came to find her. His hat in his hands and his expression carrying the particular apology of someone delivering news they'd rather not. "Mr. Harlow is at the house, miss," Tommy said. "He's asking for your father. My father's resting," Eleanor said. She handed Tommy the measuring rod she'd been using. "Tell him I'll be there directly." She did not hurry. She finished marking the drainage line she'd been surveying, made a note in her field book, and walked back to the house at her own pace. Prescott Harlow was standing on the front porch when she came around the side of the house. He was broad-shouldered and groomed and had the specific ease of a man who has never had to choose between 2 options where both of them were bad. He watched Eleanor approach with the expression of a man encountering something mildly unexpected. "Miss Whitlock," he said, "I was hoping to speak with your father." "My father is resting," Eleanor said. "I manage the estate's business. You can speak with me." A pause. The smile he offered was the diplomatic kind, the kind that covers something else. "Of course," he said. "Perhaps we could step inside. We can speak here," Eleanor said. She did not invite him in. She stood on the step below the porch so that their eyes were level, not above him, not below him, and she looked at him with the same directness she had been practicing for 6 weeks on men who found it unsettling. Harlow cleared his throat. "I wanted to revisit the offer I made your father." "I'm aware of your offer," Eleanor said. "It was 40% below market value." "Market value is theoretical," Harlow said pleasantly. "What matters is what a willing buyer will actually pay. And I'm the only willing buyer in the county at present." "That's not accurate," Eleanor said. Something shifted behind his eyes. Just slightly. "I beg your pardon? I said that's not accurate. There is at least one other party with an interest in arrangements involving this land." She did not say Nathaniel's name. She kept her expression neutral. "Your offer has been noted and declined. Mr. Harlow, if your position changes, you're welcome to submit a revised figure in writing." He looked at her for a long moment. The pleasant expression was still there, but underneath it, she could see him recalibrating, processing, doing the arithmetic of this situation and arriving at numbers he hadn't expected. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said. "Your father understands the practical reality of your situation better than—" "My father has authorized me to manage this estate," Eleanor said. "The practical reality of our situation is my business to manage. Good day, Mr. Harlow." She opened the front door and went inside. She stood in the hallway and listened to his boots on the porch steps. Listened to him cross the yard. Listened until she heard his horse moving away down the road. Then she leaned her back against the wall and closed her eyes for exactly 5 seconds. He was going to move faster now. She had just told him, without saying it directly, that she had found another party. That the window he'd been counting on, the window where the Whitlock estate had nowhere to go and no one to turn to, was closing. Men like Prescott Harlow did not respond to closing windows by stepping back. They went through the glass. She opened her eyes. She went to find her field book and started writing. She found the first piece of it on Tuesday, the day before Nathaniel was due to arrive. She had been going through the County Water Authority records, public documents, available to anyone who asked, which apparently very few people bothered to do, and she found a filing from 3 years earlier. A formal application submitted by Prescott Harlow to redirect a tributary of the shared creek basin for irrigation purposes on his eastern property. Approved. The redirection had been active for 3 years. Eleanor sat with that document for a long time. She thought about the Northfields, about the flooding in wet seasons and the strange brackish quality of the water by midsummer, about the crop losses she'd been calculating since she started keeping records, losses that everyone around her had attributed to bad luck or poor soil management or simply the unpredictability of farming in Virginia. She thought about the 1,849 survey and the fence line that was 8 feet off from where it should have been. She thought about Prescott Harlow, who had been watching the Whitlock land degrade for 3 years and had been patient about it, who had made his first offer 2 years ago and his most recent offer last week, who had built his acquisition strategy on the assumption that eventually a good family with failing land and mounting debt would have no choice but to sell. The flooding wasn't bad luck. It wasn't poor soil management. The tributary had been redirected into the Whitlock drainage basin. Slowly, incrementally, over 3 years, Harlow had been putting water onto her father's Northfields that had no business being there, destroying a quarter of every wet season's crop and watching the debt grow. Eleanor's hand was very still on the document. She had known Harlow was opportunistic. She had known he was patient and strategic and not particularly concerned with fairness. She had not known until this moment that he had been actively engineering the crisis he was profiting from. She picked up her pencil. She copied every relevant figure from the county filing onto a separate page, in her own hand, with dates and volumes and the specific coordinates of the redirection point. Then she sat back and did the arithmetic. 3 years of excess water, the acreage affected, the projected yield loss per season, the debt accumulated during the same period, which might have been avoided if the Northfields had been producing what they were capable of producing. She added the numbers twice. The total was not a small number. She folded the page carefully and put it inside the cover of her field book. Then she spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about how to use it. Nathaniel Beaumont arrived Wednesday morning on the same gray horse. At exactly the appointed time, Eleanor was in the yard when he rode in. She was wearing a clean dress, not her best, but clean, and she had taken the time to pin her hair back properly. She had told herself this was not for him specifically. This was because a professional meeting deserved professional presentation. She believed this approximately 60%. He dismounted, tied his horse, and carried his hat in his hand when he walked toward her. The same as before. The dust on his boots was real again, which meant he had ridden again, not taken a carriage. "Miss Whitlock," he said. "Mr. Beaumont." She nodded. "Come inside." At the kitchen table, the documents already laid out in the order she intended to address them, she sat across from him and put her 7 questions in front of him. He picked them up, he read them. A small silence while he read. And then he said, "These are good questions." "I know," Eleanor said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one, maybe, from a face that had been trained not to offer them easily. "The clause about the northern parcel," she said. "Whose idea was that?" "Mine," he said. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you knew it was significant and I wanted to see if you'd ask." "I'm asking. The northern parcel borders your west fence line," he said. If Harlow acquires it, he controls your access to the main road. He can make your estate functionally landlocked, not legally, but practically. Deliveries, equipment, market access. He could make your land profitable and still make it impossible to run. A pause. You already knew that. Yes, Eleanor said. You didn't mention it in your proposal. I was waiting to see if the person I was negotiating with had read the land carefully enough to see it on his own, she said. Or whether I'd have to explain it. He looked at her for a moment. You test people, he said. Everyone tests people, Eleanor said. I simply do it deliberately. He sat back. The morning light was coming through the window, and he was quiet for a moment, not the fireplace quiet. Not the silence of a man who has already decided and is waiting for the room to catch up. This was something different, more internal, the silence of a man genuinely working something out. I owe you something, he said. The room changed temperature. Eleanor kept her face where it was. This is a business meeting. Mr. Beaumont. It is, he said, and I'll conduct it as such. But I'm a man who believes in plain dealing, and I'm not able to sit at your table and discuss a partnership without saying this first. She waited. What happened at my mother's house, he said. What I allowed to happen. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong when it was happening, and I said nothing. And there is no explanation I can offer you that makes that acceptable. Eleanor looked at him. She thought about the fireplace, about him looking past her left shoulder at the middle distance, about the specific silence of a man who has already decided. She thought about the 40% below market value offer from Prescott Harlow and the 6 weeks of 12-hour days and the county filing she had found yesterday that told her someone had been deliberately flooding her father's fields. She said, "Did you ride 3 counties to apologize to me?" Mr. Beaumont, no, he said quietly. I rode 3 counties because I read your proposal, and I knew within 10 minutes that I was reading something, written by a person who understood this land better than anyone I'd encountered in years of managing properties across 3 states. The apology is separate, it was owed regardless. A long pause. I accept it, Eleanor said, and I'm setting it aside. We have business to discuss. Something in his expression shifted relief. Maybe, or something that sat close to it. Yes, we do. Good, she pulled the first document toward her. Let's start with the water rights clause in Section 3. Because I have a problem, and I think it affects both our properties. She put the county filing on the table between them. She watched him read it. She watched the moment he understood what he was reading, the precise instant his expression went from professional attention to something sharper. Something colder. This is from the County Water Authority, he said. Public record, 3 years old, he redirected the tributary onto your drainage basin. For 3 years, Eleanor said. Incrementally. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger a complaint. Just enough water over time to destroy a predictable percentage of the North Field yield every wet season. Nathaniel set the document down. His jaw was set, and then he made an offer. At 40% below our value, Eleanor said. On land he had been systematically devaluing for 3 years. He was quiet for a moment. Does your father know? He said. Not yet, Eleanor said. I found this yesterday. I wanted to understand it fully before I said anything to him. Another silence. This is deliberate, Nathaniel said. This isn't opportunism. This is fraud. Potentially, Eleanor said. Proving it is a different matter. The redirection was legally filed and approved. Connecting his intent to the filing and the subsequent crop losses requires a documentation I don't have yet. But you're going to find it? I'm going to find it, she said. He looked at the document for another moment. Then he looked at her. What do you need? He said. Eleanor had prepared for this moment. She had thought carefully about how to answer it, because the answer mattered. Because the way she asked for something, or whether she asked at all, was not a small thing. Your land agent has access to county records I can't reach from here, she said. Specifically the Water Authority's internal correspondence from the period when Harlow's application was processed. If there's evidence of how that approval was obtained, I'll have it by Friday, he said. I'll also need a surveyor, she said. Someone qualified to certify the 1,849 boundary documents and produce a current survey that will hold up if this goes to dispute. I know a man, he said. He's honest and his work is unimpeachable. I'll contact him this week. Eleanor nodded. And the water rights clause in the proposal I needed expanded. Not just coordinated management of the creek basin. A formal agreement that establishes the historical flow patterns as the legal baseline. So that any future modification requires joint consent. He was already writing. She watched his hand move across the paper quick. Sure, the handwriting of someone who writes decisions rather than suggestions, and something in her chest did a thing she did not examine closely. Anything else? He said. Yes, she said. I need the meeting between the two of us to stay between the two of us. Harlow came to call on Monday. Nathaniel looked up sharply. What did he say? He repeated his offer. I decline. But he knows I have another party interested, which means he's going to move. She folded her hands on the table. I need time to build this case before he realizes how much we know. How much time? 4 weeks, she said. Maybe 6. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, all right, my office will conduct everything through the estate management channel. Not through my name directly. Can your end hold? My end holds, Eleanor said. He nodded. They worked through the remaining 6 questions over the next 2 hours. It was efficient and specific, and surprisingly she did not have a better word for it: comfortable. Not the ease of familiarity. The ease of 2 people who think at a similar pace and don't need things over-explained and don't waste each other's time. She noticed this and set it aside. It was not relevant. When they had finished and the revised terms had been noted and the next steps established, he stood and gathered his papers and reached for his hat. He paused. Miss Whitlock, he said, Mr. Beaumont. He seemed to be choosing words with more care than he usually did. Which was already careful. The document you found yesterday. The Water Authority filing. When you found it, what was your first instinct? Eleanor looked at him. To copy down the figures, she said. Not anger? Anger comes after, she said. First you document, then you feel. He held that for a moment. And now, he said. Eleanor looked at the folded page inside her field book, visible at the edge of the table. Now, she said. I'm angry. Good, he said quietly. He put on his hat. He walked out. She told her father that evening. She sat him down at the kitchen table and put the county filing in front of him and walked him through it the way she had walked herself through it, not softening it. Not rushing it, giving him each piece in the order she had understood it herself. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. His hands were flat on the table. She watched his face go through something. She did not have easy words for the particular expression of a good man understanding that someone he had thought of as merely a difficult neighbor had been. For 3 years, deliberately destroying what he had spent his life building. 3 years, he said. Yes, Papa. The Northfield flooding. The yields. He stopped. I thought it was the land. I thought I'd done something wrong. You didn't, Eleanor said. He pressed both hands flat against the table, hard. Then he said something that surprised her. What do we do not? I'll handle this. Not we should speak to a lawyer. Not any of the deflections of a man reasserting authority he had been absent from. Just what do we do? We build the case, Eleanor said. Carefully, with documentation he can't argue against. And then we take it somewhere. He can't make it disappear. How long? 4 to 6 weeks. Maybe less, depending on what Beaumont's office can find in the county records. Her father looked up. Beaumont is involved? He has resources I need, Eleanor said. And his land borders ours. Harlow's redirection affects the creek basin, which means it affects Beaumont's water rights too. He has his own interest in this. That's not the only reason he rode 3 counties to meet with you, her father said quietly. Eleanor looked at him. It's the relevant one, she said. Her father said nothing, but he looked at her the way fathers sometimes look at daughters, seeing more than she wanted him to. Saying less than he could. All right, he said. Tell me what you need from me." The weeks that followed had a rhythm to them. Not a comfortable rhythm. Not the rhythm of things going according to plan. The rhythm of people moving fast in opposite directions, and the question of who was going to get there first. From Nathaniel's office, by Friday as promised, copies of the County Water Authority's internal correspondence from the period of Harlow's application. 3 letters. 2 between county officials. 1 between a county official and a man who worked, as it turned out, as Prescott Harlow's personal attorney. The letters did not say anything illegal on their face. They said exactly enough. Eleanor read them at the kitchen table at midnight and wrote 4 pages of notes. From Prescott Harlow, silence for 11 days. Then a new letter. A revised offer, this time 10% higher than before, still 30% below market value. Still an insult, but higher. A signal that he was nervous. That something had changed his calculation. Eleanor wrote back a single line. The Whitlock estate is not currently for sale. From the county. Because Eleanor had requested it, a surveyor's appointment for the following Tuesday. The surveyor Nathaniel had recommended was a man named Aldrich, 60 years old. Methodical to the point of slowness, with the reputation of a man whose survey results had never once been successfully challenged in court. He arrived Tuesday and spent 2 full days walking every boundary line of the Whitlock property. Eleanor walked with him, not because he needed her to, but because she intended to understand every measurement he took and every notation he made. On the evening of the 2nd day, he showed her his preliminary findings. The fence line on the western boundary was, as she had suspected, 8 feet inside the true property line. 3 years of Prescott Harlow farming land that was not legally his. "Will this hold?" Eleanor asked. Aldrich looked at her over his reading glasses. "Miss Whitlock, in 40 years of surveying, my work has been challenged in court 11 times. My findings have prevailed 11 times. He looked back at his notes. "It will hold." The moment everything changed came on a Thursday. Not a dramatic Thursday, not a day that announced itself as significant. Eleanor was in the supply office in town, reviewing the revised contract Harold Briggs had finally, after 3 separate meetings, agreed to sign, when she heard her name from across the room. Not her name exactly. A description. 2 men near the window, not paying attention to who was in earshot. One of them was a clerk from the bank. Eleanor recognized his voice but did not turn around. "Whitlock girl," he was saying. "The one who's been going around playing at estate manager. Heard she's gotten herself tangled up with Beaumont somehow." "Beaumont?" The other man, she didn't recognize him. "Duke Beaumont?" "The same. What's the connection?" "Don't know exactly. But Harlow's been asking questions. Word is he's not happy about it. Harlow's never happy about anything he didn't arrange himself. No. But this is different. Harlow had the Whitlock land as good as bought. 6 months, maybe less, and the debt would have forced them out. Now there's Beaumont in the picture, and something's changed." A pause. "Harlow's been talking to people at the bank, asking about the note." Eleanor kept her eyes on the contract in front of her. Her pencil had stopped moving. "What about the note?" the second man said. "Don't know specifics. But when Harlow starts asking questions at the bank, it means he's looking for a way to accelerate something." The clerk's voice dropped slightly. "Word to the wise, whatever the Whitlock girl thinks she's building, she'd better build it fast." She walked out of the supply office in a manner that gave nothing away. She walked to the end of the block. She stood there. Harlow's been talking to people at the bank, looking for a way to accelerate something. She had 4 weeks, maybe 6. She now had considerably less than that. She pulled out her field book, turned to a clean page, and wrote down everything she had just heard with as much precision as she could reconstruct. Then she went to find the nearest telegraph office. She sent a message to Nathaniel Beaumont's estate office with 3 words. "Timeline has changed." His reply came 2 hours later. 4 words. "Come to me. Tomorrow." She stood at the telegraph window and looked at those 4 words for a moment. Then she folded the paper into her field book and walked back to her horse. She arrived at the Beaumont estate the following morning at 9 o'clock. She had ridden the 3 counties herself this time. No carriage, her good coat and her work boots and her field book in the saddlebag. A housekeeper showed her to a study walls of books. A fireplace that was not lit, a large desk covered in documents. Nathaniel was already standing when she came in, which told her the message had reached him the same way it had reached her. With the specific urgency that makes people stand when they would ordinarily sit. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he moved to the desk and picked up a document she hadn't seen before. "I had my attorney in contact with the bank 2 days ago," he said. "About something separate. The water rights agreement will require the bank's awareness since your land carries the note." And he found something. He put the document on the desk where she could read it. She read it. It was a request, formal, submitted to the bank. From Prescott Harlow's legal office, requesting an accelerated review of the Whitlock estate's loan status on the grounds. She read it twice to make sure material misrepresentation in the management of secured assets. "He's claiming my father misrepresented something to the bank," Eleanor said. "He's claiming you did," Nathaniel said. "Specifically, that you've entered into business arrangements affecting the estate's assets without proper authorization, which would constitute a breach of the loan agreement." Eleanor went very still. "He's saying I don't have authority to manage the estate. He's asking the bank to say it," Nathaniel said. She looked at the document. She thought about every conversation she'd had in the past 6 weeks. Every signed contract, every renegotiation, every decision she had made, with the assumption that her father's authorization was sufficient. "Does the loan agreement specify who can act on behalf of the borrower?" she said. "That's the first question my attorney asked," Nathaniel said. "The answer is yes. The agreement requires authorization to be in writing and filed with the bank. My father authorized me verbally." "Yes." A silence. "He never filed it," she said. "No," Nathaniel said. Eleanor looked at the document, at the desk, at the wall of books behind his head. She did not look at him directly for a moment, because she needed a second to take this apart and look at each piece of it separately before she could speak about it coherently. "How long do we have before the bank acts on this?" she said. "My attorney believes 10 days at most before they're required to respond to Harlow's request. And if they respond in his favor, they accelerate the note. Full payment due within 30 days. We can't pay the full note in 30 days. "No," Nathaniel said. "Which means we lose the land, unless," he said, "we give the bank a reason not to respond in his favor." She looked at him now. "The Water Authority evidence," she said. "If we can establish that Harlow has been deliberately devaluing your property through illegal water diversion, and that his current action at the bank is an extension of the same scheme, we change the conversation from a loan dispute to a fraud case." He paused. "A bank does not want to be seen as an instrument of fraud." Eleanor thought about this. She thought about the county filing, the 3 letters, the surveyor's report that was 4 days from being finalized, the field book with 6 weeks of careful documentation sitting in her saddlebag. "I need 2 things," she said. "Tell me. I need my father to come to the bank in person and sign a formal written authorization. Today, if possible. I can have a carriage at your property within the hour," he said. "And I need someone to file a complaint with the County Water Authority. Formally, on record, before Harlow's bank request is processed. That has to come from you," he said. "I know," she said. "It will make everything visible." "He'll know you know. He already suspects," Eleanor said. "The letter to the bank tells us that. He moved because he was afraid of what we were building." She picked up the document from the desk. She looked at it one more time. "He moved too soon," she said. "He had 3 years of patience, and he panicked in 6 weeks because one woman started asking the right questions." She set it back down. "That's his mistake. Now it's my advantage." Nathaniel looked at her. The gray morning light was in the room, and he was looking at her with the same expression she had not been able to name since the first day he arrived at the Whitlock estate, that quality of a door slightly open that could go either way, and the sense that whatever was behind it was not something small. "Miss Whitlock," he said. "Mr. Beaumont. For the record," he said, "I have managed properties in 3 states and conducted business with some of the most strategic minds in this region." She waited. "I have never once regretted riding 3 counties to find someone," he said. "Until this week I wasn't certain whether that was about the land or about you." The room was very quiet. Eleanor held his gaze. She was aware of the field book in her bag, of the authorization letter she needed her father to sign, of the county complaint form that was sitting in the study of the Water Authority's office and needed to be filed today. She was aware of all of those things pressing, and she was aware, underneath all of them, of something she had been keeping in a locked room for 6 weeks now, something that she had told herself was irrelevant, was separate, was not the point. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, "we have approximately 10 days and a significant amount of work to do." "We do," he agreed. "So with respect," she said, "whatever that sentence was going to be, it can wait." He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his hat. "Yes," he said, "it can." He paused at the door. "But it won't wait forever," he said quietly. He walked out to arrange the carriage. Eleanor stood alone in the study. She pressed one hand flat against the desk. She breathed. She had 10 days. She had her father. She had the survey. She had the county records. She had 6 weeks of documentation that she had built, line by line, in a kitchen by a lamp that was always burning low. And she had, though she had not asked for it and was not entirely sure what to do with it, a man who had ridden 3 counties twice now, first to find her, and now to stand beside her when it mattered. She picked up her field book. She went to find her horse. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 6 weeks, Eleanor Whitlock felt something she had not let herself feel since the afternoon she walked out of the Beaumont estate, with her chin level and her throat burning. She felt like she might actually win. The carriage Nathaniel sent arrived at the Whitlock estate before noon. Eleanor was already waiting on the porch with her father when it pulled into the yard. She had told him everything on the ride back from the Beaumont estate, not softened, not rearranged, exactly as it was, the bank request, Harlow's legal filing, the specific claim that Eleanor had acted without proper authority. Her father had listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me where to sign, that was all." No argument, no deflection, no exhausted retreating into the posture of a man who has decided the situation is beyond him. Just, "Tell me where to sign." Eleanor had looked at him in the morning light and felt something shift in her chest, not quite relief, not quite grief, something in between, the particular feeling of watching a person choose to stand up when they could have stayed down. "The bank," she said. "Today we file the written authorization, and we file the Water Authority complaint in the same afternoon. Then let's go," he said. They went. The bank in town was a 2-story building on the main street that smelled of polished wood and old paper, and the specific authority of a place where people came to discover what their futures were actually worth. Eleanor had been in this building 3 times in 6 weeks. Each time, the clerk behind the front counter, a man named Garrison, thin-faced and precise, had looked at her with the expression of someone determined to be professionally neutral about something he found privately irritating. Today he looked at her and at her father and at the man who had ridden beside their carriage on a gray horse. His expression did something more complicated. Eleanor had not expected Nathaniel to come. He had not asked her permission. He had simply been there when the carriage was ready, mounted and waiting, and when she had looked at him he had said, quietly, "A man at the bank who might otherwise dismiss this situation will think twice if I'm in the room. You can object if you want." She had thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Don't speak unless I ask you to," she said. "Understood," he said. He had not spoken once in the bank. He had stood slightly behind and to the left of Eleanor and her father, hat in hand, and he had been completely silent. But his presence had done exactly what he said it would do. Garrison had straightened when they walked in. He had called his supervisor. The supervisor, a heavier man named Colton, who had the quality of someone who made decisions carefully because he had made a bad one once and remembered it had come out from the back office and shaken hands all around and listened to everything, Eleanor said, with his full attention. She laid it out cleanly, the written authorization she needed filed, the Water Authority complaint and what it documented, the survey results that were 4 days from certification, the county correspondence that connected Harlow's legal office to the original approval of the water redirection. She did not embellish. She did not speculate. She put the documents on the desk and she spoke about what they said. When she finished, Colton was quiet for a moment. "Miss Whitlock," he said, "this is a serious set of allegations." "Yes, sir," she said. "That's why I'm bringing them to you directly, rather than waiting for Mr. Harlow's request to be processed. You're aware that Mr. Harlow's filing is already under review." "I am," she said. "I'm asking you to hold that review until the survey is certified and the Water Authority has processed the complaint. 4 days. That's all I'm asking." Colton looked at the documents, at her father, briefly, very briefly at Nathaniel behind her. 4 days, he said. 4 days, Eleanor confirmed. He nodded once. "I'll hold the review pending the survey certification." "But Miss Whitlock," he met her eyes directly, "if the survey doesn't deliver what you're representing, the review proceeds immediately." "The survey will deliver," Eleanor said. She shook his hand. She walked out. On the boardwalk outside, in the cold morning air, she stopped and let out one slow breath. Her father put his hand briefly on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. "Well done," he said quietly. "It's 4 days," she said. "We haven't won anything yet." "No," he agreed. "But you bought time, and you put the bank on notice that Harlow's filing is part of something larger. That matters." He paused. "You were very good in there." Eleanor looked at him. "You were very quiet," she said. "You told me to be." "I did." She picked up her gloves from her pocket. "Thank you for coming." She put the gloves on and went to find the Water Authority office. She filed the complaint herself in person, with every supporting document she had. The clerk who processed it was a young woman who read through the county filing with the particular expression of someone encountering something they recognize as significant and are uncertain what to do with. "This will need to go to the authority supervisor," the clerk said. "I understand," Eleanor said. "How long for an initial response?" "Typically 2 to 3 weeks. I need it in 4 days," Eleanor said. "I recognize that's not typical. I also recognize that the filing I've submitted documents 3 years of unauthorized water diversion that has caused quantifiable damage to private property. The authority may want to consider the liability implications of a slow response." The clerk looked at her, looked at the filing, looked back at her. "I'll bring it to the supervisor today," she said. "Thank you," Eleanor said. She walked out into the afternoon. 4 days. Everything had to move in 4 days. She rode home and went straight to the kitchen table and started writing. The first thing that went wrong happened the next morning. Aldrich, the surveyor, arrived at the Whitlock property at 7 o'clock with his equipment and his assistant and the preliminary report Eleanor had been counting on, and a piece of information she had not been prepared for. "There's a problem with the 1849 document," he said. Eleanor set down her coffee. "What kind of problem?" "Not with the document itself. With the county records office." He put his hat on the table. He was a methodical man who did not dramatize, which made the gravity in his voice more significant. "Not less. I went to file the preliminary certification yesterday afternoon. The 1849 survey document, the original that your family holds it, needs to be matched against the county copy. Standard procedure. And the county copy is missing," he said. Eleanor was very still. Missing, the records clerk says it was pulled for review 6 days ago. He met her eyes. By a representative of Harlow's legal office. The kitchen was quiet. 6 days ago, before Eleanor had gone to the bank. Before she had filed the water authority complaint. Before any of the moves she had made in the past 48 hours. Harlow had not panicked and moved fast. Harlow had been moving for weeks. Quietly, methodically, the bank filing had been the visible part. The county records were the part underneath the part she hadn't seen. Can they do that, she said. Can his office legally pull a public record? They can request a review copy, Aldrich said. It's a legitimate process, but the original remains county property and should have a duplicate on file. He paused. Apparently the duplicate was misfiled sometime in the past 18 months. Misfiled, Eleanor said flatly. That's what the clerk said. She looked at Aldrich. He looked back at her. Neither of them said the word that was sitting in the room between them. What do we need to certify the boundary without the county copy? She said. Your original document plus 2 independent witnesses who can attest to the boundary markers as they stood at the time of the 1849 survey. He paused. The problem is finding witnesses. The survey is 77 years old. The boundary markers themselves, she said. Physical markers in the ground. If they're still there and undisturbed. Yes. I've already started looking. I found 2 of the original iron stakes on the north line. The western line, he stopped. The western line, Eleanor said. The 2 stakes closest to the disputed section have been removed, he said. Recently, from the disturbance of the ground. Within the last month. I'd estimate. The room was completely still. Eleanor looked at her hands flat on the table. Someone had pulled the county copy of the survey. Someone had removed the physical boundary markers from the ground. Not recently in a general sense, in the last month. While Eleanor had been building her case, someone had been quietly dismantling the foundation of it. Aldrich, she said, Miss Whitlock, if I can find documentation of where those stakes were photographs, written descriptions, any independent record of the boundary markers before they were removed, can you certify the line? He considered this with the slowness of a man who does not answer important questions quickly. Potentially. It would depend on the quality of the documentation. Give me until tomorrow morning, she said. He nodded once and went back to work. Eleanor went to find her father. William Whitlock had in his 61 years kept meticulous records of one thing and one thing only. Not accounts, not contracts, the land itself. In a trunk in the back room of the house, a trunk Eleanor had gone through twice in the past 6 weeks looking for financial documents without paying attention to anything that wasn't numbers, was 40 years of her father's personal journals. Handwritten, a new volume every 2 to 3 years. Eleanor pulled them all out. Her father sat across from her, and they went through them together. Starting from the oldest, looking for any entry that described the western boundary line in specific terms. An hour in, her father said, "Here," she leaned across. He had an entry from 1887, 39 years ago. A detailed description of walking the boundary with the county assessor after a neighbor dispute. He had written the location of every marker, described the terrain around each one. And Eleanor felt something that was not quite a prayer and not quite relief when she saw it. He had drawn a diagram. A hand-drawn map of the western fence line, with each stake marked and measured from a fixed point. "Papa," she said. "I always wrote things down," he said quietly. "Your mother used to say I was too thorough." "She was wrong," Eleanor said. She turned the page. Behind the diagram was something she had not expected. A letter, folded into the back of the journal, from the county assessor who had walked the boundary with her father in 1887. A formal letter, signed and dated, confirming the boundary line as established by the 1849 survey and describing the location of each iron stake. An independent contemporary witness, 39 years old. Signed and dated. Eleanor picked it up and held it very carefully. The way you hold something fragile, that is also the most important thing in the room. Do you know where the assessor is now? She said. Henderson, her father thought. He retired to Charlottesville. I believe. His son took over the office. Is the son honest? Her father looked at her. James Henderson is the most honest man in 3 counties after Jed Carter and possibly before. I need to speak to him today, Eleanor said. She was already standing. James Henderson, the county assessor, was a compact man in his 40s who had inherited his father's methodical nature along with his office. He listened to everything Eleanor said, read his father's letter twice, examined the journal diagram, and then said my father's records would have a copy of this correspondence. Can you access them? They're in the county archive. I can have them by end of day. I need them by morning, Eleanor said. He looked at her, she looked back. I'll have them by morning, he said. She was halfway out the door when he said, Miss Whitlock. She stopped. My father spoke of your grandfather, Henderson said. He said Thomas Whitlock was the most straightforward man he had ever done business with in 30 years of assessments. A pause. It appears it runs in the family. Eleanor held that for a moment. Thank you, she said. She went back to the horse and rode. She was 3 miles from home when she saw the smoke. Not a large amount, a thin gray column rising from the direction of the north fields. The kind of smoke that could be a farmer burning brush, or the kind that could be something else entirely. She rode faster. Not the barn. Not the house. The equipment shed on the north field, the one that held the tools and the irrigation equipment, and Eleanor realized with a cold drop in her stomach the copies she had stored there of the Water Authority measurements she had taken herself over the past 3 weeks. A duplicate set. Insurance against losing the originals. Jed Carter and 2 of the hands were already there when she arrived. Working with water from the trough, and they had it mostly contained, the shed was damaged but not destroyed. The equipment inside scorched but salvageable. Eleanor dismounted and stood at the edge of the heat and looked at the wall and the blown-out window frame. How did it start, she said. Jed wiped his face with his forearm. He looked at her with the expression of a man choosing his words. Found a lantern knocked over near the east wall, he said. Inside the shed, our lanterns are hung on hooks, Eleanor said. Yes, miss, Jed said, they are. A lantern doesn't knock itself off a hook. Was anyone on the property this morning? She said. I didn't see anyone, Jed said. But I was in the south field from sunup. Tommy was stopped. Where's Tommy? Eleanor said. That's the thing, Jed said. Nobody's seen Tommy since this morning. She did not panic. She stood at the edge of the burned shed, and she thought about it clearly. The way she had trained herself to think clearly, when the pressure was the highest. Because that was the only time it mattered. Harlow had removed the boundary markers. He had pulled the county survey copy. He had filed at the bank. And now if the lantern had not knocked itself over, he had sent someone onto her property. He wasn't trying to buy the land anymore. He was trying to destroy her ability to fight. She went inside and picked up her field book. The original Water Authority measurements, the ones she had filed with the complaint, were at the county office. Safe. The duplicates in the shed were gone, but duplicates were, by definition, not the only copy. She breathed. She wrote down everything she had seen at the shed. The time, the knocked lantern, Tommy's absence. She wrote it precisely and she dated it and she signed it and she put it in the field book. Documentation. Always documentation. Then she sat down and thought about Tommy. Tommy was 17. He worked hard and he was earnest and he had figured out, sometime in the past 6 weeks, to call her Miss Whitlock and mean it respectfully. He was not a complicated person. He was a boy who needed a wage and did his work. He was also, she now understood, a boy who could be paid more by someone with deeper pockets. She thought about what Tommy would have seen on this property over the past 6 weeks. The records she kept at the kitchen table, the survey work, the trips to town, the day Nathaniel had arrived, She thought about how much a boy like Tommy might tell someone like Harlow for what probably seemed like a significant amount of money. The nausea she felt was not about the fire. It was about her own blindness. 6 weeks of careful work, and she had not once considered that the threat might be inside her own fence. She picked up her pencil. She wrote Nathaniel a message. She had a boy write it to the telegraph office. His reply came in 2 hours. I know about the fire. I've had 2 men watching the road since yesterday. One of Harlow's employees was seen leaving the direction of your property this morning. I have a name. Come tonight if you can. She read it twice. He had been watching, without telling her, without asking her permission or explaining his reasoning or waiting for her to identify the need herself. She was not sure whether to be grateful or unsettled. She decided she could be both. She arrived at the Beaumont estate as the sun was going down and the light was the same deep burning gold it had been on the afternoon. She had ridden to this property 3 months ago to sit across from Lady Caldwell and hear the sentence that had changed everything. She was not the same woman who had ridden here that day. She knew that without having to think about it. The housekeeper showed her to the study. Nathaniel was there, and there was a second man in the room 50s. Weathered, with the manner of someone who works outdoors and rarely sits at desks. Miss Whitlock, Nathaniel said. This is Marcus Webb. He manages property security for the estate. Webb nodded. Eleanor sat. Tell me about the man on the road, she said. Webb told her. A hired hand, not one of Harlow's regulars, the kind of man you engage when you need something done that you don't want connected to your name. He had been seen by Webb's men at the crossroads, 2 miles from the Whitlock property at 6 in the morning. He had been seen leaving the same crossroads an hour later in the direction of Harlow's eastern property. Can you place him on my property? Eleanor said. Not definitively, Webb said. But I can place him at the crossroads at the right time. That's not enough for a legal proceeding. No, he agreed. But it's enough to know. Eleanor turned to Nathaniel. You had men watching the road without telling me. He met her eyes. I should have told you. I made a decision about your security without consulting you, and that was wrong. She appreciated that he didn't apologize for the watching itself. Only for the omission. Don't do it again without telling me, she said. I won't, he said. She nodded once. What else? He picked up a document from the desk. My attorney received this an hour ago, he said. It's a copy of Harlow's filing at the bank. He's amended it. He put it in front of her. He's added a second claim. She read it. The second claim stated that the Whitlock estate had entered into unauthorized financial arrangements with a third party, specifically with the Beaumont estate, that represented a further breach of the loan agreement, as the loan terms prohibited the encumbrance of the property through external agreements without prior bank approval. He was using the water rights agreement against her. The agreement she had made with Nathaniel, the one that was supposed to protect the estate, was now being used as evidence that she had acted improperly. The agreement isn't signed yet, Eleanor said. No, Nathaniel said. But he has documentation of our meetings. Someone provided it. She thought about Tommy. She put the document down on the desk. She said, he's not trying to buy the land anymore. He's trying to make sure I can't hold it regardless of what I do. If the bank accelerates the note, we can't pay. If we can't pay, the bank forecloses. And at foreclosure, who do you think is going to be the only buyer? Yes, Nathaniel said. He's closing every door, she said. He's trying to, Nathaniel said. There's a difference. She looked at him. 4 days ago you said Harlow moved too soon, he said. He panicked because you started asking the right questions. That's still true. A man who panics makes mistakes, he paused. What's the mistake he made this week? Eleanor sat back. She thought about the boundary markers pulled from the ground. The county copy of the survey, the fire, the amended bank filing. She thought about a man who had operated for 3 years with patience and invisibility, and who had, in the past 10 days, made himself visible in 6 different places. He's shown his hand, she said. Every one of those actions, Nathaniel said. The markers, the survey copy, the fire, the amended filing. Each one can be documented. Each one can be connected to him. Separately, their difficulties. Together, he paused. Together, they're a pattern. A pattern of deliberate interference, Eleanor said slowly. Which, combined with the original water diversion evidence, establishes intent, not just sharp business practice. She stopped. Malicious intent to deprive. That's what my attorney called it, Nathaniel said. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about Colton at the bank. About the 4 days she had bought. About Henderson and his father's letter and the diagram in the journal. She thought about what she had and what it meant if she brought it together correctly. I need to talk to your attorney, she said. He's in the next room, Nathaniel said. She looked up. I had him ride out this afternoon, he said. I thought you might want to speak to him tonight. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. This man who had stood by a fireplace and said nothing. This man who had ridden 3 counties twice and sent a carriage and stood silently in a bank and had 2 men watching her road and his attorney waiting in the next room. You anticipated this, she said. I anticipated that Harlow would escalate, he said. I didn't know how, but men like Prescott Harlow don't stop. They accelerate. You should have told me. Yes, he said. I should have. I was trying to handle things without adding to what you were already carrying. Don't do that, Eleanor said quietly. Don't protect me from information I need. I can carry the weight. I've been carrying it. He was very still. I know you can, he said. And something in his voice was different from anything she had heard in it before. Not professional, not careful, just direct and quiet and real. I know exactly how much you can carry, Miss Whitlock. I've been watching you carry it. The room was very quiet. Eleanor held his gaze. She did not look away, and she felt in the locked room in her chest, where she had been keeping things for 6 weeks, something shift. Not break open, not release, just shift. Like a door that has been held shut by pressure and the pressure has changed direction by a fraction, and now the door is still closed but not quite as tightly. She looked at the connecting door to the next room. Let's talk to your attorney, she said. The attorney's name was Graves. He was somewhere around 60, thin and dry-voiced, with the quality of a man who has spent a lifetime in rooms where other people's futures were being decided and has developed a very precise sense of what matters and what doesn't. He listened to everything. Eleanor told him everything: the water diversion, the survey, the boundary markers, the fire, Tommy, the amended filing. She spoke for 20 minutes without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the fire changes things. Up to the fire, Harlow's actions were aggressive but defensible. Sharp practice. Legally questionable on the water diversion, but everything else could be characterized as competitive business conduct. He paused. The fire is different. If we can establish that someone entered your property and set it deliberately. We're no longer in a civil dispute. We're in criminal territory. We can't establish it definitively, Eleanor said. Webb can place a man at the crossroads, not on the property. Not yet, Graves said. But there's something else. The lantern. He looked at his notes. You said the lantern was found knocked over inside the shed. Yes, your lanterns are hung on hooks. Yes, is there any reason a lantern would be inside the shed rather than hung outside or at the entrance? Eleanor thought. No. We keep the interior clear of open flames because of the equipment oil. Graves nodded slowly. So a lantern inside the shed is itself anomalous. Someone brought it in, yes. If we can recover the lantern or what's left of it and it's not one of your lanterns. Eleanor went very still. She thought about the equipment shed, about the burned wall, about what had been salvageable. Jed, she said. I beg your pardon, Graves said. My foreman. He would have cleared the debris. She was already standing. If there's anything left of the lantern, he'll know where it is. She was at the door before either man spoke. Miss Whitlock, Graves called after her. It's nearly 9 o'clock. Jed Carter doesn't sleep before 10, she said. She went out. Jed was in the bunkhouse when she arrived. And he was awake, and he looked at her the way a man looks at a woman who has appeared at his door after dark with something urgent in her face and decides without hesitation to take her seriously. "The lantern from the shed," she said, after the fire. "Do you know where it is?" Jed was quiet for a moment. "I pulled it out of the debris," he said. "Figured it needed to go back to the barn." "Did it go back to the barn?" "Not yet." I set it aside. He stood. "Come on." He led her to the side of the equipment shed where the salvaged items had been stacked: tools, hardware, a scorched length of rope, and at the end of the pile, a lantern, badly scorched, the base warped from heat, but intact enough to be identifiable. Eleanor crouched down and looked at it. It was not one of theirs. She knew every lantern on the Whitlock property. You knew your equipment when you were the one managing it. The Whitlock lanterns had a distinctive hook and fitting on the base that her father had purchased from a specific supply shop in Richmond 12 years ago. This lantern had neither. She looked at Jed. "Get me something to wrap this in," she said. "I'm taking it tonight." Jed got her a piece of canvas. She wrapped the lantern carefully, the way you handle evidence, and she carried it back to the Beaumont estate in her saddlebag. She put it on Graves's desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Where did you get this?" he said. "My foreman pulled it from the debris," she said. "It's not ours." Graves picked it up carefully and turned it over in his hands. He looked at the base. He looked at the maker's mark stamped into the metal, faint but visible. "I know this mark," he said. Eleanor waited. "It's a supply house in Richmond," he said. "Specific line of lanterns sold in bulk to agricultural operations." He looked at her steadily. "Harlow's Eastern property purchases supplies in bulk from Richmond." The room was completely still. "Can you prove that lantern came from his supply order?" Eleanor said. "I can try," Graves said. "Supply manifests are recorded. If his operation ordered this line of lanterns, it'll be in the records." He paused. "It's not proof of arson. Not on its own. But it's the first physical object we have that places something connected to Harlow on your property." Nathaniel had been standing at the edge of the room. He had not said anything since Eleanor came back. Now he said, "What do we have in total?" Graves looked at his notes. "The county water filing and the 3 letters establishing the diversion and potential corrupt approval. The 1,887 boundary letter and the journal diagram, pending Henderson certification. Aldrich's survey in progress, which can be completed without the county copy using the Henderson documentation. The Water Authority complaint, filed and pending. Webb's witness placing Harlow's man at the crossroads. The lantern," he paused, "and Miss Whitlock's 6 weeks of personal documentation covering every management decision, every conversation, and every action she has taken since assuming management of the estate." He looked at Eleanor. "How complete is that documentation?" he said. "Complete," she said. "Every meeting, every figure, every letter I sent and received. Dated and signed." "Then here is where we are," he said. "Separately, none of this is enough. Together, it establishes a pattern so consistent and so deliberate that any reasonable person looking at it will understand what it represents." He folded his hands. "The question is where we bring it. A courtroom is slow. The bank is faster but limited. The county could act on the Water Authority complaint. But that process has its own timeline." "There's another option," Nathaniel said. Eleanor looked at him. "There's a county commissioner's hearing scheduled for next week," he said. "Public. Any landholder can bring a matter of land and water rights for public consideration." He paused. "If we bring this there, all of it, in one room, in front of everyone, Harlow can't make pieces of it disappear. He can't pull a document from one office, and a marker from the ground, and a file from the bank, because it all happens at once. In public, on record. He'll be in that room," Eleanor said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "He'll fight it." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "But he'll have to fight it in front of every landholder in the county. In front of the bank commissioner. In front of the Water Authority representative." He met her eyes. You've been building this case in private for 6 weeks. Harlow has been counting on the fact that the pieces are separate and can be addressed separately. The hearing puts them in one place at the same time. Eleanor looked at the lantern on the desk. She thought about 3 years of patience, about water being redirected slowly enough that no one would notice, about markers removed from the ground, about a boy paid to watch and report. She thought about a man who had believed, for 3 years, that the Whitlock land was already his, that it was only a matter of time before the family had no choice but to hand it over. She thought about the day she had walked out of the Beaumont estate, with her chin level and her throat burning and the decision already made. I will find my level, and I will make them regret believing I had none. When is the hearing, she said. 8 days, Nathaniel said. Can we have everything certified and documented by then? Graves said. If we start tonight. Eleanor looked at both of them. Then she sat down, opened her field book, and pulled her pencil from her coat pocket. Then let's start tonight, she said. They worked until 2 in the morning. And in the cold quiet of that study, with the lamp burning low and the papers spread across the desk and the lantern sitting at the edge of it like an accusation waiting to be heard, Eleanor Whitlock began building the final piece of the case that would end Prescott Harlow's 3 years of carefully engineered patience. She was not afraid. She was something she had not expected to be. She was ready. 8 days. That was what they had. Eleanor slept 4 hours that first night and was back at the desk before dawn. Graves had left with a list of 12 things he needed to accomplish before the hearing. Nathaniel had ridden out at midnight to send urgent messages to 3 separate offices. Eleanor had ridden home in the dark, with her field book against her chest and her mind running through every piece of the case the way you run your tongue over a cracked tooth, checking, verifying, finding the weak points before someone else did. The weak points were real. The lantern was circumstantial. The letters were suggestive but not explicit. The water diversion filing was documented, but the connection to crop damage required expert testimony they hadn't yet secured. The boundary survey was strong but incomplete without the county copy. And Henderson's father's letter, while valuable, was 39 years old. Each piece was defensible on its own. Together they formed a picture so consistent it was nearly impossible to dismiss. Nearly was not enough. She spent the first 2 days working on the one piece she could strengthen herself, the documentation of crop losses. She went back through her father's records for 3 years. Cross-referenced the rainfall data from the county agricultural report she had requested weeks ago, and built a table that showed, with mathematical precision, the divergence between expected yield and actual yield in the north fields, and the direct correlation between that divergence and the period following Harlow's water redirection. She had Aldrich review her methodology. He read it twice. Then he said, "Miss Whitlock, this is the kind of analysis that takes an agronomist weeks to produce." "I had the data," she said. "I just organized it." "You did considerably more than organize it," he said. He put the pages down. "I'll sign my name to these figures." That was day 2. Day 3 brought the first piece of genuinely good news. Henderson called on her in the morning with his father's archived copy of the 1887 boundary letter, a perfect duplicate of the one in the journal. Signed by the same hand, dated the same date, and filed in the county assessor's office where it had been sitting undisturbed for 39 years because nobody had thought to look for it. 2 original copies, both authenticated. Harlow's office pulled the county survey, Eleanor said. They didn't know about the assessor's archive. Most people don't, Henderson said. It's a separate filing system. Different office, different building. His mistake, Eleanor said. His mistake, Henderson agreed. Day 3 also brought Tommy. He appeared at the front gate late in the afternoon, his hat in his hands and his face carrying the expression of a boy who has done something hex not take back and has had 3 days to understand what it means. Eleanor saw him from the porch. She stood for a moment, watching him stand at the gate, uncertain whether to come forward. Then she walked down to meet him. He couldn't look at her directly. "Miss Whitlock," he said. His voice was rough. "I need to tell you something. I know what you did." "Tommy," she said quietly. He flinched. "I didn't know about the fire." "I swear it. I told a man who worked for Harlow about the survey work and Mr. Beaumont's visits. I didn't know what they were going to do with it." He stopped. "I didn't know about the fire." Eleanor looked at him. She thought about what it cost a 17-year-old boy to come back to a gate he'd betrayed and stand there. "How much did he pay you?" she said. He told her. It was not a large amount. Not for what he'd given away. She felt something that was not quite anger and not quite pity. Something in between that had no clean name. "Did you tell anyone about the hearing?" she said. "The commissioner's hearing next week." He shook his head. "I stopped talking to him 2 days after the fire. When I heard about the fire I knew." He stopped again. "I'm sorry, miss. I know that don't fix it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Go home," she said. "Don't speak to anyone about this property or about the hearing to anyone outside this gate." "Can you do that?" "Then go home." He went. She walked back to the house and stood in the hallway for a moment. He hadn't known about the fire. She believed that. He was not sophisticated enough to lie convincingly about it. And the genuine horror on his face when he mentioned it was the specific horror of someone who handed someone else a weapon without understanding it was a weapon. It did not excuse it, but it meant the fire had been Harlow's decision. Not shared, not delegated openly, his alone. She wrote that down. Day 4 was when Lady Caldwell arrived. Eleanor was at the kitchen table when the carriage came up the road. She recognized it before it stopped the dark lacquer. The specific set of the coachman's shoulders. She had ridden in that carriage twice in 3 years. She did not move from the table. The knock at the door came a minute later. She opened it herself. Lady Margaret Caldwell stood on her porch. Alone, without her usual composed armor of certainty or rep. With it, but worn differently, less like a weapon. More like something she was holding in front of herself because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. "Miss Whitlock," she said. Eleanor looked at her. "Lady Caldwell," she said. "This is unexpected. May I pause?" "Yes," Eleanor said. She did not offer tea. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table covered in documents and figures, and the accumulated evidence of 8 weeks of war, and Lady Caldwell looked at the papers for a moment with the expression of a woman taking in something she had not expected to find. "My son told me what is happening," she said. "With Harlow." "With the hearing." "Then you're informed," Eleanor said. "He also told me." Lady Caldwell paused. Her hands were in her lap and she was holding them very still, which Eleanor recognized as the effort of a woman who does not show discomfort easily choosing to show it now. "He told me what he should have said in my parlor 2 months ago." Eleanor said nothing. "I came to tell you," Lady Caldwell said, "that what I said to you in that room was said out of fear, not wisdom." She met Eleanor's eyes. "I have managed my son's prospects since his father died because I believed I understood what this family needed. I believed that a woman without standing would diminish what he had built." She paused. "I did not consider the possibility that she might expand it." The kitchen was quiet. Eleanor looked at this woman who had, 2 months ago, dismantled 3 years of her life in the time it took to drink a cup of tea that no one had touched. "Lady Caldwell," Eleanor said, "I appreciate you coming. I understand it was not easy." A pause, "But I need to be honest with you. What you said in your parlor didn't break me. It clarified something I needed to be clear about." She held the woman's gaze. "I'm not building this estate back to prove something to you or to your son. I'm building it because it belongs to my family, and because it is worth building. Whatever happens between Nathaniel and me, if anything happens, will be on terms that have nothing to do with what I was told I was worth 2 months ago." Lady Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, complicated, layered, the expression of a woman reconsidering something she thought she had settled years ago. You are, she said finally, not what I expected. No, Eleanor said. I don't imagine I am. Lady Caldwell stood. She smoothed the front of her dress, the same gesture Eleanor had made 2 months ago, walking out of the Beaumont estate. Neither of them acknowledged it. My son is fortunate, Lady Caldwell said. Whether he deserves to be is a question I'll leave to you. She walked out. Eleanor sat alone at the table. She put both hands flat on the papers in front of her. She breathed. Then she went back to work. Day 5 brought the twist that nearly broke everything. Graves arrived at the Whitlock property in the early afternoon, with his coat still dusty from riding, and his expression carrying the specific gravity of a man who has received news he does not want to deliver. Eleanor saw his face when he dismounted and said, "Tell me, the Water Authority response came in," he said. "And they've declined to act on the complaint," he said. "Pending further review, they're citing insufficient evidence of deliberate diversion as opposed to natural water table variation." Eleanor stared at him. "I submitted 3 years of county filing documentation," she said. "The original approval, the tributary coordinates." "The timeline, I know," Graves said. "The supervisor who reviewed it is a man named Alcott. He's been with the Water Authority for 15 years. A pause. "Who appointed him?" Eleanor said. Graves met her eyes. "He was appointed to the position 6 years ago," he said. "The county commissioner at the time was Harlow's brother-in-law," Eleanor said. She had not known this until she said it. She had known there was a brother-in-law in county government. She had read it somewhere in her research weeks ago, but she had not connected it to the Water Authority. Yes, Graves sat down. She sat very still and thought about this. The Water Authority complaint had been the anchor of the public case. The piece that showed deliberate interference with a shared natural resource. Without it, without official recognition that the diversion was improper, the county letters and the timeline and the crop damage analysis were evidence of damage but not evidence of wrongdoing. "Can we go over Alcott?" she said. "To the State Water Authority." "Yes, but the state process takes months. We have 8 days, I know," Graves said. "Then we go to the hearing without it," Eleanor said. Graves looked at her carefully. "Eleanor, without the Water Authority finding, the case at the hearing is significantly weaker. The boundary dispute and the fire and the bank filing are all serious. But they can each be addressed individually. Harlow's attorneys will argue each one separately. Without the Water Authority establishing the pattern, I know what it means," she said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Get me everything we have on Alcott. His appointment, his decisions over 15 years. Every complaint that came across his desk and how he ruled on it." Graves blinked. "That's a significant amount of research. We have 5 days," she said. "Start today," he went. Eleanor sat alone. She thought about the Water Authority. About a supervisor appointed by a man connected to Harlow who had just declined to act on a complaint with 3 years of documented evidence behind it. She thought about what that meant. It meant Harlow had more hands in more places than she had calculated. And then she thought about something else. She thought about the 12 members of the County Commissioners Board who would be present at the hearing. She thought about the bank commissioner who had agreed to attend. She thought about the dozen or so independent landholders who would be in the room for a public hearing on land and water rights. If Alcott's refusal to act was itself documented, if the pattern of his decisions over 15 years showed a consistent bias toward Harlow-connected interests, if she could show the room not just what Harlow had done to the Whitlock land, but how deeply his influence ran into the county systems meant to protect landholders, the case wasn't weaker. The case was bigger. She picked up her pencil. She wrote Nathaniel a message. He came that evening. He came alone. Without Webb or Graves or any of the apparatus of the past 2 weeks. And he sat across from her at the kitchen table and listened to what she had found and what she was thinking. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You're going to argue that Alcott's refusal is itself evidence," he said. "I'm going to show the room what Harlow has built in this county," Eleanor said. "Not just what he did to us. The full scope of it. The water authority appointment. The bank contact. The county records access, the survey copy. All of it in one picture. She paused. A man who has that many pieces in place didn't build them for one property. He built them for a pattern of acquisition. We're not the first. Nathaniel looked at her. Do you have evidence of other properties? He said. Not yet, she said, but I think the Hendersons do. The assessor's office would have records of every boundary dispute in the county for 40 years. If Harlow has run this scheme before, the evidence is in those files. That's 2 days of work, Nathaniel said. I know, Eleanor said. I need to ask Henderson tomorrow. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her name without the formality. She noticed it. She did not remark on it. Yes, she said. I want to say something that isn't about the hearing. She waited. I've been watching you work for 6 weeks, he said. I've watched you build something from nothing. Fight people who had every structural advantage over you. Find the piece under the piece under the piece until you understood the whole thing. He paused. And I've been thinking about the day in my mother's parlor. We've discussed that, Eleanor said. We've addressed it, he said. That's not the same as discussing it. He met her eyes steadily. I sat by that fireplace and I told myself I was choosing the responsible thing. That my mother was right about what the family needed. That I was being practical. He stopped. The truth is, I was afraid. Not of my mother, of what choosing you would cost me in the world I'd built. And I chose my world over you. The kitchen was very quiet. Eleanor looked at him. She thought about the fireplace. About the middle distance. About the particular silence of a man who has already decided. She thought about what it cost him to say this. She thought about what it cost her to hear it. I know, she said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the real reason, he said. Not because I expect anything from it. You have every right to keep this between us exactly where it is, Nathaniel, she said. He looked at her. I know why you stayed silent, she said quietly. I knew it then, she stopped. I needed you to know that I knew. Because if you were going to apologize, I needed it to be for the right thing. Not for your mother's words, for yours. A long silence. I'm sorry, he said. For mine, Eleanor held that. She held it the way you hold something that you've been carrying for a long time, and someone has finally offered to help you set down. And you're not entirely sure yet if it's safe to. Thank you, she said. She pulled the nearest document toward her. Now, she said, I need to talk to you about the Henderson files. Something moved in his expression, something that was not quite a smile and not quite relief, but lived somewhere between the two. He pulled his chair in and leaned over the table. Tell me, he said. Henderson gave her the files the next morning. 3 hours in the assessor's archive, and Eleanor had found 4 of them. 4 properties, 4 families, 4 separate boundary disputes over 12 years. Each resolved through county process, each resolved in favor of Harlow's interests. Each handled by the same 2 county officials who appeared in the correspondence from the water diversion approval. 3 of the 4 families had sold their land within 2 years of the dispute resolution. All 3 had sold to Prescott Harlow at below market value. The 4th family had fought for 4 years and then abandoned the dispute when their legal costs became unsustainable. That family's land bordered Harlow's western property. It was the same western property where the disputed fence line on the Whitlock estate would give him road access. Eleanor sat in the archive with the files spread across the reading table and felt something cold and clear move through her. Not shock. She had stopped being shocked by Harlow days ago. What she felt was the particular weight of understanding something completely. This was not a man who had gotten lucky. This was not opportunism or even calculated aggression against one family. This was a system, built deliberately over 12 years. County officials selected or influenced, processes used as tools. Families isolated and worn down one at a time so that no one could see the pattern because they were each too consumed by their individual crisis. She had been fortunate in one specific way that none of the others had been. She had started asking questions before the crisis was complete. She photographed every relevant document with the method Graves had taught her, tracing onto clean paper. Signed and dated. She carried them out under her arm like they were ordinary. She went directly to Graves. He looked at the copies for a long time. Then he said, "This changes the hearing." "Yes," Eleanor said. "This is no longer a dispute about one estate," he said. "No," Eleanor said. "It's a case about what one man has been doing to this county for 12 years. And we're going to make sure every person in that hearing room understands that before Harlow's attorneys say a single word." 2 days before the hearing, Prescott Harlow made his last move. It came through the bank. Colton sent a message asking Eleanor to come in. She went alone. Graves was with the county commissioner's office, finalizing the hearing documentation, and she did not want to wait. Colton met her in his office with the expression of a man who is deeply uncomfortable with what he is about to say. "Miss Whitlock," he said, "I want to be direct with you." "Please," she said. "We've received a second communication from Mr. Harlow's office. They've escalated the filing to the state banking authority." He paused. "That changes the timeline. The state authority has the power to mandate immediate action on the note independent of our local review." Eleanor felt the ground shift under her. "How immediate?" she said. "If the state authority issues a directive, we would have no choice but to act within 48 hours. Even with the hearing pending? The banking authority and the commissioner's hearing are separate processes," Colton said. He looked genuinely pained. "I want you to understand I have found your documentation compelling. I believe you are acting in good faith. But if the state authority, when would you receive a state directive?" Eleanor said. "The request was filed this morning," Colton said. "Typically 3 to 5 days for a response. 3 to 5 days. The hearing was in 2 days. If the state banking authority responded before the hearing or immediately after, before any action could be taken on the hearing's findings, the note would be accelerated, and the land would be forfeit before any remedy could be applied." She sat with this for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, "What would prevent the state authority from acting?" Colton blinked. "I beg your pardon? What legal mechanism would prevent the state banking authority from issuing a directive? The related matter is pending before the county commissioner," she said. "Is there a stay provision? An injunction process?" Colton looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize, the expression of a man recalibrating what he thought he was dealing with. "There is an emergency injunction process. The circuit court," he said slowly. "If a party can demonstrate that a banking action would cause irreparable harm pending the resolution of related legal proceedings." "Who files that?" Eleanor said. "An attorney would need to." She was already standing. "Thank you, Mr. Colton," she said. She went to find Graves. Graves filed the emergency injunction application that afternoon. He filed it in Eleanor's name, with supporting documentation that included every piece of the case: the water diversion, the boundary dispute, the 4 previous properties, the fire, the lantern, the county correspondence, every page of it, assembled into a single organized filing that told the story in order. Eleanor sat in his office while he worked and answered questions when he asked them, and did not speak otherwise, because she was counting the hours. The circuit court judge was a man named Alderman. Graves had appeared before him a dozen times. He described him as cautious and fair and unlikely to move quickly. They needed him to move quickly. The application was submitted at 4 in the afternoon. At 7 that evening, Graves received a message. He read it. He looked up at Eleanor. "Judge Alderman has issued a temporary stay," he said. "All banking actions related to the Whitlock note are suspended pending the outcome of the commissioner's hearing." Eleanor heard this. She held it. "How long did it take him to decide?" she said. 3 hours, Graves said. He held up the message. He included a note. He read it aloud. "The documentation submitted in support of this application represents the most comprehensive evidence of systemic interference with property rights I have encountered in 20 years on this bench. I am granting the stay with alacrity. The room was quiet. With alacrity. A judge who had not moved quickly in 20 years had read Eleanor's 6 weeks of careful documentation and moved in 3 hours. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs. She breathed. "All right," she said. "All right," Graves agreed. "Tomorrow we prepare the presentation for the hearing." "Yes. Everything in order," she said. "Every document indexed, every piece of testimony confirmed." "Yes," she stood. "Then I'll see you tomorrow," she said. She walked out into the evening air. She rode home. Her father was waiting on the porch. He had been waiting a great deal lately, not helplessly, not anxiously, but with the particular watchfulness of a man who has decided to trust someone completely and is learning what that feels like. "Well," he said. "We have a stay," she said. "The bank can't act until after the hearing." He let out a long breath. "And the hearing?" he said. "Day after tomorrow," Eleanor said. In front of everyone. Her father looked at her in the evening light. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for the past 6 weeks, with something she did not have easy words for. Not pride exactly. Something older and deeper than pride. "Are you ready?" he said. Eleanor thought about everything she had built. Every document, every conversation, every early morning in the field, and every late night at the kitchen table, and every room she had walked into and refused to leave. She thought about 4 families who had lost their land. She thought about a water authority that had declined to act. A county survey that had been pulled. Boundary markers removed from the ground in the night. She thought about a lantern that didn't belong on the Whitlock property, sitting on Graves's desk wrapped in canvas. She thought about Nathaniel standing in her kitchen, saying for the right thing. She thought about the day she had walked out of the Beaumont estate, with her spine straight, and her throat burning, and a decision already made. "Yes," she said. She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened her field book to a clean page, and in the last quiet hours before the day that was going to decide everything, Eleanor Whitlock wrote down exactly what she intended to say, not to the commissioners, not to the bank, not to the county, but to every person in that room who had watched a woman be told she was not enough and had said nothing. She wrote it until the lamp burned low. She wrote it until it was true. The morning of the hearing, Eleanor did not sleep. She was dressed and at the kitchen table by 4 o'clock. Her field book open, her notes in order, everything she had built over 8 weeks arranged in front of her in the precise sequence she intended to present it. She did not review it again. She had reviewed it enough. She simply sat with it, the way you sit with something you have made with your own hands before you carry it into the world and find out whether it holds. Her father came down at 5. He did not say anything. He made coffee and set a cup in front of her and sat across from her and drank his own in silence. That was enough. That was exactly enough. They rode into town together at 7. The commissioner's hall was already filling when they arrived. Eleanor had not expected the crowd. The hearing was public record, but she had not anticipated how many people would come: landholders from 3 counties, bank officials, water authority representatives, and the specific category of person who arrives at public hearings, because they have learned that the things decided in those rooms affect them, whether they show up or not. Graves met her at the door with his document case and the expression of a man who has done everything he can and is now entirely at the mercy of how well it holds together in real time. "Full board," he said quietly. "All 12 commissioners." The bank commissioner came himself, not a representative. And Harlow brought 3 attorneys. Eleanor looked at the room. Harlow was already seated at one of the front tables. He was composed and groomed and had the specific stillness of a man who believes the room belongs to him. He glanced at Eleanor when she entered. A brief glance. Almost dismissive. She met it without blinking. She took her seat. She put her field book on the table in front of her. She waited. The presiding commissioner, a heavy-set man named Dowell, who had the gravity of someone accustomed to managing complicated rooms, called the session to order at 9 o'clock. He stated the matter before the board. Land rights dispute. water diversion complaint, related banking actions. He invited opening statements. Harlow's lead attorney went first. He was smooth. Eleanor had expected smooth. He characterized the water diversion as a legally approved modification that had been in place for 3 years without complaint. He characterized the boundary dispute as a clerical matter arising from outdated documents. He characterized Eleanor's complaint as the desperate action of a family facing legitimate financial consequences of poor estate management, combined with what he called an inappropriate external partnership that had introduced unauthorized encumbrances to secured assets. He was measured and professional and very good. Eleanor watched the commissioners' faces while he spoke. 3 of them were nodding slightly. 2 were writing notes. The rest were unreadable. Then Dowell looked at Eleanor. "Miss Whitlock," he said, "you may present." She stood. She did not look at Harlow. She did not look at Nathaniel, who had come in quietly during the opening statements and was seated along the side wall. She looked at the 12 commissioners, and she began to speak. She did not start with the water diversion. She started with Mrs. Aldora Finch, a woman who had owned 40 acres on Harlow's eastern border 12 years ago, who had lost a boundary dispute through the same county process, who had sold her land to Harlow 18 months later at 60% of its value because the legal costs of continuing to fight had consumed everything she had, who was now 63 years old and living in 2 rooms above her daughter's house in Charlottesville. The room was very quiet. She presented the documentation, the assessor's records, the pattern across 4 families over 12 years, the same officials appearing in the same roles in the same outcomes. She did not editorialize. She put the documents in front of them, and she let the pattern speak. Then she presented the water diversion, the county filing, the 3 letters, the correlation between the redirected tributary and the crop losses in the North Fields, documented by Aldrich's analysis and signed by his name. The mathematical precision of it, not bad luck, not poor management, but a calculated degradation of land value over 3 years. She watched Harlow's lead attorney begin writing rapidly. She presented the boundary survey, Henderson's certified copies, the 1,887 letter from the elder Henderson's archive, Aldrich's findings on the ground markers. She presented the photographs of where the markers had been and the disturbed earth where they had been removed. One of the commissioners, a woman named Pratt, who had been silent through the entire proceeding, leaned forward. "Miss Whitlock," she said, "you're stating that the boundary markers were physically removed from the ground." "Yes." "Ma'am," Eleanor said, "within the past month, my surveyor can speak to the evidence in the ground if the board wishes to hear from him." Dowell said, "We do." Aldrich took 5 minutes. He was precise and dry and utterly unimpeachable. And when Harlow's attorney tried to challenge the timeline of the marker removal, Aldrich looked at him with the patience of a man who has been doing this for 40 years and said, "Sir, I have been reading Disturbed Earth for 4 decades. Those stakes were pulled within the past 30 days. I will stake my professional reputation on that assessment, and I am aware that it is the only reputation I have." The room was very quiet after that. Then Eleanor put the lantern on the table. She did not say it was arson. She presented it as a question. A lantern found inside a closed equipment shed where open flames were prohibited by standard practice. A lantern that was not from the Whitlock Properties supply. A maker's mark that appeared in the bulk supply manifests of Prescott Harlow's Eastern agricultural operation. A witness placing one of Harlow's hired men at the crossroads 2 miles from the Whitlock property the morning of the fire. She put Webb's signed statement on the table. She put Graves's supply manifest research on the table. She looked at the commissioners. "I'm not asking this board to find arson today," she said. "I am asking this board to look at every piece of what I have presented and ask themselves whether the pattern they see is coincidence or design." Harlow's lead attorney was on his feet. "Commissioner Dowell, this is speculation dressed as evidence." "You'll have your rebuttal," Dowell said. His voice had changed. Something in the room had changed. Continue, Miss Whitlock. She presented Alcott's refusal to act on the Water Authority complaint. She presented his appointment history. She presented 12 years of his decisions, cross-referenced against Harlow's acquisition record. And she put the numbers side by side without comment and let the commissioners count them. Commissioner Pratt said, "Every ruling in favor of Harlow-connected interests." "Ma'am," Eleanor said. Another commissioner, an older man named Cole, who had not spoken once, said. "Every single one?" "Everyone I found," Eleanor said. "I may not have found all of them." Cole looked at Harlow for the first time. Harlow's expression had not changed, but his lead attorney had stopped writing. Eleanor set the last document on the table. "This is a summary," she said, "of what one man has done to 5 families in this county over 12 years. Not because they were weak, not because their land was bad. Because he was patient, and because he had influence in the places that were supposed to protect them." She paused. "I am the only one of those 5 families who understood what was happening before it was complete. I had 6 weeks. The 4 families before me had no warning at all." She looked at the room. Not just the commissioners, the whole room, the landholders along the walls. The bank commissioner in the second row, Nathaniel, still and watching from the side. And she had not seen her until this moment. Lady Caldwell, seated near the back, her hands folded in her lap, watching her son's face. "I am 26 years old," Eleanor said. "I have been told, in various ways in various rooms, that I am not qualified to manage land, conduct business, or make decisions that men should make. I have been told that I am not the right level." She paused. "I want this board to look at what I have built in the past 8 weeks and tell me what level that is." The room was completely silent. Then Harlow's lead attorney stood and began his rebuttal. It lasted 20 minutes. It was thorough and technically competent, and Eleanor listened to every word of it with her hands flat on the table and her face entirely still. When he finished, Dowell called a recess. Eleanor sat in her chair. Her father put his hand on her shoulder from behind. He did not say anything. She covered his hand with hers for a moment. Then Nathaniel was there, standing beside the table, his hat in his hands, his expression not careful and not professional, just direct and real and entirely present. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "We haven't won yet," she said. "No," he said. "But I want to say something before we know the outcome. Because I don't want the outcome to be the reason I say it." She looked at him. "I love you," he said. "Not because of what you did in that room just now. Not because of the survey or the water diversion or the case you built. Because of the woman who set down a teacup without making a sound and walked out of my mother's house and decided that wasn't the end of her." He paused. "Because of who you were before any of this. I was just too afraid to see it." The room around them was noise and movement, and the business of a recess in a public hearing. Eleanor looked at this man. This man who had stood by a fireplace and said nothing, and then ridden 3 counties twice, and stood silently in a bank, and stayed up until 2 in the morning over documents, and sent a carriage, and had his attorney waiting, and watched her work for 8 weeks without ever once trying to take the work from her hands. "Nathaniel," yes, "ask me again," she said. "When this is over, ask me again, when neither of us is standing in the middle of something and we can think clearly." Something moved through his expression. "I will," he said. "I know," she said. Dowell called the room back to order at 11:30. He spoke for 3 minutes. He said that the board had reviewed the documentation presented by Miss Whitlock and found it to constitute substantial evidence of a systematic pattern of interference with the land and water rights of multiple property holders in the county. He said the board was referring the matter of the Water Authority approval to the state for immediate investigation. He said the boundary survey as certified by Aldrich was accepted as authoritative and the fence line would be re-established at its legal position. He said the bank commissioner had agreed, based on the documentation presented, to dismiss Harlow's amended filing and restore the standard terms of the Whitlock estate note. Then he said, "The board is also recommending that the county sheriff's office open an investigation into the circumstances of the fire at the Whitlock property on the 14th. The evidence presented today regarding the lantern and the witness testimony warrants formal investigation." He looked at Harlow. "Mr. Harlow," he said, "this board will be notifying your office formally of all findings. You are free to seek legal counsel." Harlow said nothing. His lead attorney leaned in and said something in his ear. Harlow's expression did not change, but his hands on the table were pressed flat and hard, and Eleanor, watching him, understood that she was looking at a man who had built 12 years of careful invisible power and had just watched it become visible all at once in a single morning. He looked at her, for one moment directly. She looked back. She did not smile. She did not look away. She simply held his gaze with the same steadiness she had been practicing for 8 weeks on men who found it unsettling. Until he looked away first. He looked away first, sighed. In the sharp autumn air, her father held her for a long moment without saying anything. She let him. She pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed and felt the full weight of 8 weeks settle through her body in a way she had not allowed it to while there was still work to do. "Your mother would have loved this," he said. Eleanor laughed. It came out rougher than she expected. She would have been terrified. She would have been terrified and proud, he said. "Same as me." He stepped back and looked at her. "Go on," he said. He nodded toward where Nathaniel was standing 20 feet away, hat in hand, waiting with the particular patience of a man who has learned to wait for things that matter. "I'll get the carriage." Eleanor looked at her father. She looked at Nathaniel. She walked toward him. When she reached him, she stopped and looked up at him in the cold, bright morning light, and she said, "Ask me." He looked at her. "The hearing is over," she said. "We can think clearly." Something broke open in his expression, not weakness, not collapse, but the specific opening of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has finally been told he can put it down. "Eleanor Whitlock," he said, "I have ridden 3 counties twice. Stood silently in a bank, lost 2 nights of sleep to documents, and watched you dismantle a 12-year conspiracy in a single morning." He took one step toward her. "Will you give me the chance to spend the rest of my life proving I am worth the woman you have always been?" Eleanor held this. She thought about the teacup set down without a sound, about the lamp burning low over the kitchen table, about Jed Carter saying she ain't going to fall over, and Henderson's father's letter, and the lantern wrapped in canvas, and the moment Judge Alderman had moved with alacrity. She thought about who she had been on the morning she rode to the Beaumont estate in her best blue dress. She thought about who she was now. She reached out and took his hand. "Yes," she said, "but understand something clearly." "Nathaniel, tell me," he said. "I am not marrying into your world," she said. "I am not stepping up into your level or being rescued into your standing. We are building something together on terms that belong to both of us equally." She held his gaze. "Can you live with that?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Miss Whitlock, I rode 3 counties to find the woman who wrote those words on paper." He brought her hand up and held it. "I would not have it any other way." She believed him. She had learned, over 8 weeks, to be very good at knowing when to believe a person. And Eleanor Whitlock, who had walked out of a parlor told she was not enough and had spent 8 weeks proving that the only person qualified to determine her level was herself, looked at this man who had finally learned to see her clearly and decided that some things were worth building twice. Her level had never been determined by money or blood or the opinion of a room. It had been determined by courage, and the man standing in front of her, holding her hand in the cold autumn light outside a commissioner's hall, was the first person who had ever been brave enough to meet her there.